Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to be talking about the Battle of Fort Wilson. I will get to why I put Fort Wilson into quotes in a little bit, but before we start we should talk about how by 1779 in Philadelphia there was a really strong push to confiscate property from Loyalists. Now this idea was common throughout the colonies, or now the young states, but in Philadelphia it was very particularly strong because the British had just come and occupied the city and then kind of left. So the Patriots there were really unhappy with Loyalists. Philadelphia, however, as the biggest city in the colonies, had many very wealthy people who had kind of kept their noses down and were like, we're going to stay at it and see how things play out because we just want to be wealthy and live in Philadelphia. We don't really care who's in charge. So a lot of Patriots were not happy about that, especially the lower class Patriots. Now, there was a founder whose name was James Wilson. James Wilson signed the Declaration of Independence. He was a founder through and through. He was also one of the most brilliant legal minds in the colonies. So, when these wealthy Philadelphians wanted someone to defend them from having their property confiscated, well, they paid big money for the best lawyers, and one of these men was James Wilson. So, on October 4th, 1779, a bunch of militiamen were just in a tavern, getting drunk, and complaining about Loyalists. And unfortunately, they got a little too drunk and a little too complainy, and they said, you know what, let's go do something about this. Let's get James Wilson, because he is defending them. Conveniently forgetting that he had just signed the Declaration of Independence a few years earlier. So these militiamen picked up their guns and went to James Wilson's house. And Wilson, getting word of this, had a few of his friends help him quickly barricade his house, which became dubbed Fort Wilson. Not really a fort, not even fortified, just a house with some drawers pushed up against the doors. And actually, the men tried to storm the house, and they lit the first floor on fire. And there were some gunshots. Some of Wilson's friends started shooting at him to say, don't burn down the house while we're inside of it. And 3 of the attackers were killed, and a Captain Robert Campbell, who was helping Wilson defend his house, was shot in the head. Now, the violence came to an end when Joseph Reed showed up. Now, Joseph Reed was president of Pennsylvania, a position we would know now, we would consider governor. He was basically governor of Pennsylvania. He shows up, and Joseph Reed had just recently signed the Articles of Confederation. So another important founder who had his signature on some important documents. Reed was also the type of man who was elected governor or president of Pennsylvania by the same militiamen who were carrying their guns. Granted, at the time you would have needed to own property to vote, so many of these men couldn't vote, but he was their guy, is my point. So when he shows up with the city troop of light horse, more or less the local militia, or more, actually a better way to say it is the local police. He shows up with the police and says, what are you guys doing? And the drunk militiamen start, they back off and, okay, President Reed, yes sir, sorry sir. And they leave. And that is the quick conclusion of the Battle of Fort Wilson. I will say, what's really interesting about this is Joseph Reed and James Wilson were rivals. They were more or less not the heads of different political parties within Pennsylvania. Reed was, and Wilson was pretty high up on his side. So the fact that it speaks a lot to Joseph Reed, who would show up to try and restore order in a situation where it was his political rival that was being attacked. But these were men of honor, and that was what they did. Interestingly enough, it's a good thing that James Wilson was spared from this attack, because less than a decade later, he would attend the Constitutional Convention and be a major player in creating that document. Again, he had a brilliant legal mind. So he was extraordinarily important to creating, founding, framing the United States of America. So we'll call it at that today. Keep it nice and short. That was the story of the Battle of Fort Wilson. I do want to give a quick shout out to the AmRev podcast, which I'll put a link to in the description. Michael Troy over there, he puts out a podcast once a week about the American Revolution. He does an extraordinary job, and he speaks better than I do, apparently. And he actually just reached out to me today and invited me to speak on a panel at History Camp in Boston on March 14th, 2020, which I am very excited to do. And I will, as the weeks and months go by, bring this up more and more because I've never been on a panel, and it's very exciting. So I will get out of here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.